Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Middle East Review. I'm Amir Oren, brash enough to sit in for Danny Ayalon, who is away. And as always with Danny, here is Dr. Eran Lerman, Colonel retired, former Israeli Directorate of Military Intelligence and National Security Staff senior official. Welcome.
As always, pleasure.
Eran, as we are winding down 2023 and welcoming 2024, let's do something a bit out of the ordinary and try to view the outgoing year in the context of the previous 74 or 75 years since the establishment of Israel, in order to find for it its rightful place in the league of years. This has probably been quite a bad year for Israel. The first 9 months were spent on internal fighting, and perhaps it had something to do with the fact that Hamas dared attack Israel on October the 7th. We are still in the war which started at the time. But let's go back to 1948, obviously the key starting place for where we are right now. And after this, Israel's war of independence, what the Palestinians called the Nakba, but obviously it was a year where other regional players took part, Egypt, Transjordan of the time, even Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, as well as global powers such as Great Britain.
Indirectly.
Yes, first of all, and then also the United States and the Soviet Union and France. So after 48, what is the next year which you find important in the pattern of things?
Let me first of all say that many Israelis would wish they had this car from Back to the Future, in which they could fly back and erase
the DeLorean.
The DeLorean and erase the whole of 2023 from memory and do it again differently. But this is not yet an option, and it is a formative year. Clearly, I would say 56 comes up not just because of the Sinai campaign that Operation Musketeer, as the British and the French called it, with Operation Kadesh, as we called it, the tripartite collusion signed at Sèvres, or as the Egyptians call it, al-udwan al-thulathi, the tripartite aggression. The bottom line is 56 was also the pivotal year for a number of other developments, including at the time, the all-important Israeli-French cooperation, which laid the foundations for Israeli power in several respects, some of them openly discussed, some of them cannot be openly discussed, that led to Israel's greatest military victory ever in 1967, could not have happened without these foundational elements.
The one that you were indicating, the Dimona deterrent.
Well, as you said, at least in the minds of our neighbors, sure. This is looking back to the mid-50s. That is the point in which Israel has generated both a robust military offensive capability in conventional terms and in their minds, which is the one important thing there is in this respect, also an non-conventional deterrence. But 56 was also an important year in other ways. It is the year in which the United States basically signed the death warrant of the colonial system through its intervention against the British and the French adventure in Egypt, and turned the Cold War into a direct game for regional control.
But the profits went to the other superpower,
Indeed.
which also threatened Israel, Britain, and France, but deepened its penetration into the Arab sphere.
Clearly, because Nasser, who was the military loser and the great strategic winner of that conflict, became a threat to everything that was really important to America at the time, not Israel, which was a marginal concern, but the Saudis and the established pro-Western regimes. And then came 58, another pivotal year, the fall of Iraq, the American intervention in Lebanon, not very much involving Israel.
The Egyptian-Syrian Confederation.
Yes, Syria annulling itself for 3 years. But not directly, it didn't draw Israel directly in, although we did facilitate the British intervention to save Jordan. But it was another pivotal year in the regional power game.
Hold on, Ran. Go back just to late 56 or early 57, when Israel was forced out of Sinai, Gaza, Sharm el-Sheikh. In conversations with General Meir Amit, who was chief of operations for the Sinai campaign, the real planner, even though Chief of Staff Moshe Dayan has always got all the glory, and General Amit was later director of military intelligence and head of Mossad, when it was pointed out to him that the express war aims of 56 were not achieved, he said, yes, but we had a full decade of quiet on the Egyptian front.
It's more than that.
But this was a byproduct. This was not what Israel intended when it went to war.
No, Ben-Gurion basically was hoping that Nasser would be toppled by the intervention. That did not happen. But Israel did demonstrate its military worth. It did, let's say, impress on the minds of Americans that it is not a marginal player. And I've seen sufficient evidence that the transformation in American attitudes towards Israel actually goes back to the second Eisenhower term.
Eisenhower doctrine. And
the Eisenhower doctrine led to some conclusions. By 58, and certainly by 1960, when he...
Do you think that the fact that General Eisenhower was this famous military man from World War II, did that have a lot to do with the fact that he started to admire the IDF, the Hawk missiles, even though they were approved for sale only under Kennedy? The process started under Eisenhower.
I think what drove him was, as you said, the profound disappointment. I saved Nasser's neck, and he basically gave all credit to the Soviets. Within months, he realized the need to actually erect some barrier to Egyptian ambitions, the Eisenhower doctrine. And Israel increasingly came into his calculus. There's a famous story. He was talking to one of his few Jewish backers, and he said, if I had you by my side at the time, I wouldn't have done this to Ben-Gurion. And I think he realized that Israel is an asset, and that's when the turning point comes.
It was also an internal realization in Israel that while diplomats like Moshe Sharet, the former foreign minister, and Abba Eban, the long-serving ambassador to the US and the UN, were trying to effect traditional diplomacy, the display of Israeli military might was more convincing.
Yes, even George F. Kennan, who was famous for being, at the end of the day, a dove in many ways, has once said that the music of diplomacy sounds much better if there's some military background of the role of the...
So then we go to 67.
And then 67 is too obvious in some senses. I mean, it is the turning point in terms of the realization for probably even Gamal Abdel Nasser himself, despite his rhetoric, and others.
Yes, he restarted secret talks with Robert Anderson, who was Eisenhower's Secretary of the Treasury, and actually Eisenhower's favorite candidate to replace him. He preferred him over Nixon, but it wasn't to be in the Republican Party. And Anderson resumed his secret travels and tried to get Nasser to work for some grand compromise with Israel, even before Sadat.
I think Dan Shiftan and others have written about the shift in Egyptian orientation that actually predates Nasser's death. But it was, of course, to be Sadat who brought this to fruition. But the 67 changes the game in many ways. Above all, as we now realize, it brought back the Palestinian factor into the equation, having been basically out of it with some minor attacks in the mid 60s.
The Palestinians.
But the real question was Israeli control.
The Palestinians, you mean the PLO under Arafat working from the outside, and also the inhabitants of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But before that, there is also the watershed resolution of the UN Security Council 242, which for the first time offered the Arabs and Israel the choice of territories for peace. Israel was basically given, if the Arabs so agree, a guarantee that what it had worked for between 1949 and 1967 would finally come to be.
Well, here's the deepest fear of the Israeli government after the victory was that they would face a repeat of the Eisenhower treatment meted out to Ben Gurion in 56.
Withdrawal without peace.
Without withdrawal, essentially unconditional withdrawal with some American commitments that were not fulfilled at the end.
And UNEF and the UN Emergency Force in the Sinai.
Both of which vanished under Nasser's pressure, and the right of navigation and the UNEF forces. And their fear was that it would repeat itself. But Johnson was a very different player, and his perspective was very different. It was also shaped by the bitterness of a war elsewhere in Vietnam, and his choice was very clear. Israel would be entitled to keep what it achieved until it can actually trade not necessarily all of it, but much of it, for peace.
But you can read it.
And then not all is, of course, the missing definite article from the actual text of the resolution.
But this is when you read it from left to right. If you read it the other way, the Arabs will get back most of their territories, provided they reciprocate with peace.
Yes. And long before the resolution was actually passed in November, I always, when I talk to my students, say, why are we pestering you with dates? Because dates tell you a story. War ends, well, between us,
12th.
On the 12th, because
Mount Hermon.
The Mount Hermon was taken after the ceasefire.
Yeah.
But it takes another 5 months and 10 days for the resolution to actually pass in November, in 22nd of November. So why 338 was during 73 was passed before the war was over. And 242 took 5 months.
But 338 is actually a copy of 242.
Copy-paste. But what took 5 months. What took 5 months is for the United States and its friends, the British, the Danes, and others in the Security Council, to break the efforts of the Soviets and the Arabs to impose a 56 repeat and
unconditional
return to the status quo ante and so on. They even
non-acquisition of
territory by force. But they actually went to the General Assembly and to the what would be amazing to an Israeli 56 years later. They failed in the General Assembly to secure a majority for an imposition.
However, Israel, while 5 or 6 months earlier would have seen it as a great victory, at that time resisted diplomatic efforts, and this is how we get to 1973. Because we have to go down the calendar.
We have to be precise. On the 19th of June, Israel laid on the table for American use a willingness to withdraw to the international border with both Egypt and Syria.
Not on the West Bank.
But it never made up its mind about the West Bank and Gaza, not then and not since. But later, after Khartoum, after the Arab refusal, as the war of attrition unfolded, the Israeli government actually rescinded this offer formally.
Eran, we still have 50 years to go and only 10 minutes.
And that led us to 73. And 73 is obviously another pivotal moment, but it is pivotal also in the sense that our leadership and our military did not understand why Sadat went to war until well after the war was over. And he consummated his pact with Kissinger. Kissinger saved the day by refusing an attempt by Nixon to go Eisenhower and decided to stick with the Israeli military maneuver and then use it in the deepest Machiavellian positive sense.
To pry Egypt out of the Soviet.
Egypt finally and totally out. And that is the pivotal moment. Not just the war, but the 7th of November visit by Kissinger in Cairo, which generated a transition of Egypt, the most, I think, impressive gain by the West in the Cold War, up until the last stages of collapse in the 80s, and of Soviet collapse in the 80s, and which led by natural progression to 79 and the peace treaty.
And earlier, 77, the Sadat visit. By the time Sadat came over, neither Golda nor Kissinger were in power. Others took the place. Jimmy Carter, Yitzhak Rabin came and went, Menachem Begin. So 79, the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement, a year and a half after the visit and several months after Camp David of 1978. And after 79, it seems as if the moderate Arab countries and Israel could lead a new Middle East, but lo and behold, at the same year, 79, the coup or the revolution in Iran.
Yes. And the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. Everything changed. 79 is a pivotal year, not only for Israel in terms of the peace treaty, but also for the region and the globe, because the Cold War goes into high gear, actually, and which would lead to Soviet collapse and defeat, to the election of Reagan as president. Both Iran and Afghanistan contributed to that.
Establishment of CENTCOM as an important American command, because up until that time only...
Carter called it the RDF. It was the Reagan administration, 83, that turned it into CENTCOM. And contrary to the expectations that somehow the Far East or Europe would be the decisive battlefronts, it is actually in the Middle East writ large, if you include Afghanistan.
So Iran all of a sudden becomes a force for evil. from Western perspectives.
No, also, I would say from an Iranian perspective, if you ask the average Iranian on the street,
would he or she dare to answer?
if they feel courageous enough to answer, there are several very simple things.
If you ask Hassan Nasrallah of Hezbollah,
well, the heroes of the resistance have brought nothing but misery to look at Gaza, but also look at Lebanon.
Okay, so Lebanon,
and Iran. In 79, Iran was 3 times richer per capita, but that's roughly the same because same populations more or less as Turkey. Now it's 4 times poorer. It's incredible how much damage a revolution can inflict on its own people.
You mentioned Lebanon, 1982. Is that a pivotal year? The Israeli invasion, and it turned out 18 years of Israeli presence in part of Lebanon?
It's not. No, I don't think it changed anything in any profound sense, other than it brought the PLO to a defeat that made it impossible for them to return.
Okay.
Other than on Israeli conditions.
Okay. So,
but it left a dent on Israeli self-assurance.
Right. Okay. So put 1982 aside. 1990, Desert Shield. 1991, Desert Storm. After the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, and for the first time, Israel is being attacked by an Arab country and does not respond because of higher considerations.
Well, again, at the time, people made much of it. Down the road, what was really important was not so much the 40 missiles fired at Israel, but the destruction of Saddam's reputation and Saddam's standing. The regime survived for another 12 years,
right,
until destroyed by the Americans. But the implications for the region and the world were immense. But we have to remember, this is happening in the context of Soviet collapse, the end of the Cold War, what the late Charlie Krauthammer called the unipolar moment. And Israel rides on that wave. We cannot understand 93 and Oslo if we don't bear in mind that Israel at the time was in a position of power, unparalleled position of power, in the sense that it was allied with the singular leader of the world.
So in order to get to 93, Rabin, Oslo, we have to pass through the same year, 91, Shamir, the Madrid Conference. And as you said, there is no Soviet Union. Iraq is under the American heel, or at least Northern Watch, Southern Watch. Iran is not yet such a threat, even though it...
still reeling from its defeat.
Yes, and it is seeing
War.
The opportunity to be exploited by the misfortune that Saddam brought on himself. So Oslo, 93, Rabin, Clinton, Arafat.
It should have been pivotal, but in the long perspective of 30 years, there was something wrong with the process, clearly. Some would say it was too slow and too hesitant. Others would say, quite frankly and simply, that it was perhaps the right approach, but with the wrong partner. Because Yasser Arafat turned out to be
obstinate.
I would say duplicitous. I used to say that there was a special provision in his rear meat enabling to sit on fences. He was one leg here and one leg there.
A rebel, not a statesman.
One leg with Rabin and one leg with Hamas. Our chief of military intelligence at the time.
Uri Sagi?
No, Yalon.
Yalon. Oh, you mean later?
A bit later. How did he become a right-winger? I mean, that's a kibbutznik. From
he couldn't stand being lied to.
He couldn't stand being lied to. And interestingly enough, in the context of 2023, what he was being lied to was about Muhammad deaf. Now Arafat says, Muhammad who? As if he doesn't know who this Hamas operator sheltering under his wing in Gaza really is. 30 years later, we see we are reaping the deadly harvest.
Is there any year
that
you pick out, because we have only 1 minute, between 93 and 23, over these 30 years, 2005, the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza?
Probably because it created the situation in which we are in now, because it drove very deep divisions through Israeli society. Much of what we saw in 2023 before October 7 was a distant echo of the pain and frustration of an important segment of Israeli society over Sharon's decision.
You mean the settlers who brought to partnership in power, and perhaps real power because of Netanyahu's problems, they brought to power Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, on whom Netanyahu is dependent for political survival?
Or was, because we are sailing into uncharted waters now. I think either he would have to shift to a more balanced alliance with the center, or we may face an election in 2024. But
that's for next year's December postmortem. Eran Lerman, thank you very much.
Amir.
Dr. Lerman, Colonel Lerman retired. We, or at least Danny and Eran, will be back for another Middle East review next month. For the time being, thank you. Shalom from Jerusalem.
God is light. In Him there is no darkness at all. In a world where darkness is rampant, manifest by injustice, hatred, violence, or war, disinformation fueled by deception serves as a source that perpetuates evil. TV7 Israel strives to serve as a beacon of light, sharing the truth with the nations from Jerusalem. As we enter this season of giving, we humbly ask for your support. Your generous donations play a vital role in ensuring that our content remains free. We look forward to another year when we are able, by the grace of God, to bring to you, our viewers, the light of truth. From all of us here at TV7 Israel News, we wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.